Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're calling us from today. Thank you all so much for joining our webinar today on transportation electrification in cities, multifamily housing insights. We'll be connecting the dots between city planners, utilities, and the future of EV charging at multifamily housing properties. My name is Simbia Yusuf Muller. I'm the events manager at Forth. And before we start the webinar today, and I pass it along to our moderator, Christy, Jeon, Senior Program Manager at AtkinsRéalis, we have a few announcements and updates from the Forth team. Attendees, we ask that you please submit your questions via the attendee chat. If you have any questions during the webinar, we will get to them during the audience Q&A portion of the webinar. We have some short presentations from the presenters, and then we'll jump into facilitated discussions. And we will also be sharing the webinar recording as well as the presentations and additional resources with you all following the webinar shortly. So you won't miss a thing. And if you are tuning into Forth and our webinars for the first time, a little bit about us. We are on a mission to electrify transportation. We bring people together to create solutions in our 5 focus areas, which are access to electric cars, access to charging, access to emerging nodes, events and partnerships, and policy advocacy. If you would like to learn more about Forth, a link will be dropped in the chat, or you can find us at forthmobility.org. And we want to thank our members and partners. And we also want to thank our partner today, ITE, for the partnership and the partnership on this conversation. It's been a great partnership. But if you are interested in partnering with Forth on a webinar or joining us as a member or sponsoring all of the various activities we have going on, you can find that information on our website, or you can discuss with our wonderful membership and partnership manager, Rachel Haverkamp. Our email is on screen, and we will be emailing you in the recap with more information. And I don't know if you know this, just over a month, 4 weeks, over 4 weeks left to go. And I hope you already have your tickets for the Roadmap Conference. We have a great show, a great presentation panels. We have great dialogue and also some fantastic networking opportunities ready for you all. The Roadmap Conference is happening October 14th through the 16th, 2025 in Detroit, Michigan. And we want you to extend your week in Detroit. Don't just come on October 14th, come for the full week. We have a lot of partner events already cooking up for you all. And you can find that information in the link dropped in the chat. We also have 2 workshops that are being planned by Forth and our partners. The first one on powering communities, and the other one with our partner on the Charging Smart program, Charging Smart workshops for local government. We will be dropping the link as well as more information in the chat. And I don't want to hold you up for too long. I will pass it along to our moderator today, Christy. Christy, do you want to join me up on stage?
All right. Can you all see me okay?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for the great introduction. Good morning, good afternoon. I would like to welcome everyone to the panel discussion today. My name is Christy Jeon with AtkinsRéalis. I'm a traffic engineer and a planner in Atlanta office. And for ITE, I'm part of ITE Planning Council and also EV and Electrification Subcommittee as well. So I'm very excited about today's discussion. So just to set the stage up, residential EV charging is becoming more and more important because the research shows that majority of people are actually charging at home. And like personally, I mean, I own an EV and I live in a single family home. So I mean, it's easier for me, but there are a lot more considerations and challenges for multifamily housing conditions. So today, before we go on to our discussion, we have a couple of polling questions. So Cynthia, when you're ready, if you can put on our first question here. So anyone can answer, have you lived in an apartment or condo? The results are coming in. Just give a couple more seconds. Yes, yeah, I mean it's majority, like 98%, 96% majority. It's yes. Okay, thank you. Yeah, and then the second question we have you ever used or have you seen EV charging at multifamily housing facilities? Okay, results are coming in. Yeah, it's about 70-30 split. Yeah, like still majority of people here attending have seen or used EV charging in multifamily. Thanks, India. The last question we have is that what audience group do you represent? We have some option: utility, government, condo board of directors, EV charging company, or multifamily housing developer. Okay, looks like the government is the majority. Like we have about 61%, 60% government, utility and EV charging. We have about 30%, and we have some developer, including our presenter, Theresa. All right. So thank you very much, Cynthia. So with that, just tell you, we have a great panelist, 4 panelists today, from across the life cycle, the ecosystem of EV charging. And Theresa Kaiser-White is the Vice President of Asset Management at Willow Bridge Property Management, and she is representing a developer side. And we have Randy and Whit, and Randy is the honorary member of at ITE, representing ITE, and Whit is a senior specialist at Forth. So those two, professional organizations related to this topic. And finally, we have Jeon MacArthur, the Sustainable Transportation Program Manager at the TREC, Transportation Research and Education Center at Portland State University. And Jeon is representing academia. So we will be directly hearing from our panelists in a little bit, but before we head to our presentation and discussion, we'd like to start with one icebreaker question. So the attendees, feel free to chime in by answering in the chat as well, but we will have our speakers answer by this order. So the question is, what is the most unique charging solutions you have seen for multifamily housing property, if you have? So I think probably Theresa, you want to start on this question?
I think I've seen lots of different varieties and flavors of EV charging solutions, but there's a relatively new, they're not brand new, but Zeal charging. They have a solution that doesn't require Wi-Fi, and that's kind of a new idea out there in the market. Kind of eliminates some of the challenges with making sure that you've got adequate repeaters and you've got adequate Wi-Fi through a garage. So that's simplifying some things for some owners, but no, it's not simplifying everything. It all requires a lot of planning and strategy.
Awesome, thank you, Randy.
I haven't seen a lot of unique stuff. I've seen the metal conduit down to a charger on a concrete wall in a multifamily garage. And I've seen the image, but not the reality of a solar panel above on a carport with the chargers below. But those would probably fall into the 2 categories: the one I would like to see and the one I definitely have
seen. Thank you. Wait.
Yeah, so similar to what Randy said, I really appreciate seeing the solar to chargers. But the most unique one I think I've seen is really the wide array of direct to meter charging, where the charger is connected to a resident's meter or a unit owner's meter. And it's usually not connected directly to the meter. There's only a few solutions that can do that. But it's either it cuts into the feeder line, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I think those are the most unique because it's interesting. It's different.
Thanks, Reed. Jeon?
Yeah, I know we're going to spend most of the time on this webinar talking about residential and personally owned EV cars. But just talk about micromobility and e-bikes. In Tigard, Oregon, there's 2 affordable multifamily housing complexes that have e-bike lending libraries that have a fleet of bikes within those facilities, and they have charging for those e-bikes as part of living at that location. They have access to those bikes, so a little different type of charging scenario there.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for all your perspectives. Yeah, I haven't seen many of them, but yeah, those are some things that I would love to see. So we are going to move on to our short presentations by each panelist on their organization's work in this space, multifamily electrification programs. So we'll start with Theresa, and we'll go into Randy, Whit, and Jeon. So yeah, take it away, Theresa, whenever you're ready. And please submit your questions through the attendee chat. So we will have some discussion questions prepared, but at the end of the webinar, we will go over some of your questions, attendees' questions as well. So thank you. And Theresa, whenever you're ready.
Okay, sorry about that. I wanted to kind of touch on we've got a couple minutes here to talk about this. I want to touch a little bit on the economic environment that's happening in the multifamily space. First of all, the last couple of years, there's been a ton of new supply. We have a total inventory of apartment units of around 23 million, but we've added between 500,000 and 600,000 units over the last 2 years, primarily in the Sunbelt regions. So that slowed a bit of the development, couldn't get things to pencil out, but still we're looking forward to 2026 and 2027. And we believe that development will start to increase again. Occupancies are kind of starting to come back up again. And so we'll get past this little bit of a challenging phase. We're also going to talk a little bit about the impact of EV charging on the multifamily development space, challenges that developers are facing, and then the impact of utilities. I work for Willow Property Management Company. I'm the VP of Asset Management, and we manage 226,000 units across the country. We are primarily a third-party manager, but we do have a fund of owned assets. As I mentioned, the inventory. I think what's important to mention here is that about 5% of the U.S. multifamily properties are offering on-site charging solutions as of 2025. That could certainly be better. I mean, we all know we drive around every day on the street and see how many Teslas and how many other electric vehicles are being driven throughout the country. With that said, 80% of all EV charging occurs at home. Less than 5% of that home charging takes place in multifamily homes. So there's a significant gap there for 31% of the U.S. households living in multifamily apartments. Adoption is increasing, and we are starting to see developers advancing some of their initiatives for EV charging. And then there's also states that are mandating EV charging: California, Colorado, Delaware, Illinois, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, and Washington. They all have some pretty strong initiatives in place that require EV charging. Some of the challenges we face, I'm kind of listed out on the slides here: capacity grid, permitting, regulatory hurdles, infrastructure costs. It all takes a ton of planning and cooperation and collaboration with the utility company. There's also space constraints and site limitations on some of these dense urban multifamily communities, so that even adds more complexity. And then the lack of universal connectors, and then supply chain challenges, just to mention some of the high level constraints.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you, Theresa. We're going to go to Randy now.
Thanks, Christy. ITE got involved in the EV space in a sort of a small way in the last year. We had a working group underneath the Sustainability Committee that involved Christy as well as Jack Fleck and Adam Gleason. And we looked into a bunch of issues of, particularly for ITE practitioners, of getting ready for EVs. And many of the issues that we identified, Theresa identified some of those already, are very obvious in terms of, how do you accommodate EVs in a retrofit case versus new construction? When you're dealing with a luxury apartment and new construction, it's a little bit different than in an older building with electrical load issues that create problems in terms of being able to deliver an EV charging station. The issue of third-party providers coming in versus direct-to-consumer power billing was identified as a key issue. And probably one of the things that we heard the most about was the issue of, from an agency perspective, of what the right roles are for people. For example, on the agency side, should it be through conditions of development or through code modifications? And you heard Theresa mention a lot of states have gone with code modifications. The amount of funding and support and the role that the agencies play and where that should be done and where equity plays a role in that. The use of public right-of-way versus private right-of-way for the chargers. And a lot of the site planning issues, particularly when you're looking at common access EV charging stations. For example, when it's off-site to the apartment, a common site like a church or, let's say, a gas station or some retail place that would become a common site versus the on-site. And what we identified as probably one of the things that ITE's role would play a key role is maybe there's a need for identifying the number of parking spaces or the percent of parking spaces that need to be EV ready or EV compatible or have chargers. So I just use three terms. Those are defined in the working tech brief that ITE has, which is available on the ITE website. For example, EV capable being that you've got basically a circuit breaker that works and some conduit in place, but no wire pulled. EV ready, you've got wire pulled. You may even have an outlet that you can plug into a 240 for a level 2 charger. And EV installed means all of that plus the charger installed. And so those terms sometimes get used a little loose and freely, and understanding there is a difference between each of those we found was very important. And the last issue that came out of the paper that I think was important for designing, particularly for multifamily housing, is making the spaces and the charging stations accessible. There's a lot of great information, and the Access Board has a website that provides a lot of guidance that helps people before they invest and spend the money to do it the right way to make it accessible to people. It's sort of sad to spend that kind of money and then not have it be accessible to all folks. So with that, Christy, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Randy. We'll go to Whit next. Whit, whenever you're ready.
Hello, everybody. See a lot of familiar faces in the attendee list, so welcome back to all the returners, and welcome again to anybody that's new. So last few years, the Forth team and many partners have been working on a charge at home educational website, and it's meant for multifamily decision makers to learn more about EV charging. So a wide array of decision makers. I'm not going to go down that list. It has a lot of tools and documents and links to places where people can learn more. And most recently, over the last few months, we've been adding a lot of case studies, and we're adding another couple of toolkits specific to condominiums pretty soon. I want to point out two big items that, in addition to the case studies, the webinars that we've had over the last many months, they're all recorded, and all the recordings are put up on the website as well. There's a lot of really great discussions there. And then free technical assistance consultations for decision makers. That can be a great opportunity to understand your property more and really dig into the deep, the nuances of your property. Sorry. Somebody, thank you. So I don't think the panel is going to talk in depth about the next two items, but I wanted to talk a little bit about them because they're just that important. And somebody advance the slide. I'm having a trouble. There we go. Cool. Oh, we're good. Okay. Sorry for hopping around. Okay, I can control it now. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between dedicated and communal charging configurations. Those are the primary two options in multifamily properties. Basically, dedicated chargers, you have to have assigned or deeded parking, and it's one charger per space. That space might be open to multiple spots, but usually it's just to one unit, and that unit has bunch of different, multiple people, multiple cars could go use that assigned spot so long as they have access to it via their unit. And then the other charging configuration is communal charging, and that's basically where you can charge and then you either need to move your car or other arrangements can be made, but typically you have to move your car after you're done. There's a lot of complexity there as well, but those are the main two ones. Actually, the only two ones, but there's a third that is not really talked about. That's more on the reserved side. Lastly, I wanted to talk a lot about direct-to-meter wiring because it's not very well known. There are different ways of doing direct-to-meter wiring that I've listed out right here. If you know of one that's not listed there, please let me know or put it in the chat. And I don't have a lot of time to really discuss this, but it's a type of energy management system. In some ways, I kind of think of it as less of an energy management system and more of just a different type of wiring configuration, but sometimes they overlap. In this case, I believe they're considered a way of energy management system. Typically, you're doing this in an assigned parking space or a deeded parking space, and more so in the deeded and condominium situation than assigned. But with some of the new standards in California, people are having to do direct-to-meter wiring with assigned spaces as well. And there's a lot of complexity and nuance here. There's a lot of different options, but it's a space that I'm really interested in seeing grow as it puts the cost of charging onto the resident's utility bill. So, all right, I will pass it back to Christy.
Thank you, Whit. So John, we have a final presentation and we'll move on to discussion, please.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm going to take a little different tack on this. I'm looking at kind of like the travel behavior and the travel need of individuals at multifamily housing and giving a little update on two projects that I'm working on. But I think, one thing just I would like to point to is like NREL has put together a report in 2021. There's No Place Like Home, which then they developed their EVI Pro program. There's a light version that you can kind of play with to see how many charging stations you need in your community to manage the demand. But one of the things, 95% of that demand is coming from single family homes, but they're suggesting that 1% be neighborhood L2 chargers, public right-of-way chargers, or at multifamily homes too. And so, for a place like Portland, you're looking at almost 700 of these type of chargers. So that said, one of the projects we're working with Forth on, Department of Energy funded project, is called AMP, Affordable Mobility Platform, where we're evaluating their program of electric EV car sharing. And at facilities around the country, affordable multifamily housing, they're putting EV car share into those locations. And just want to point out, preliminary results that we're doing. There's a lot of high interest in car sharing, but major concerns of cost. Obviously, what it costs to use the car. But most of these are transit dependent, or at least half are transit dependent and half, have cars. But they have interest in cost of ownership and the cost to what it means to travel. The other thing is technology. Obviously, how do you use this new device at these facilities? But people that are using them to do errands, medical appointments, and other types of day-to-day use, particularly for the transit-dependent folks. That said, the goals of this program is to kind of install EVs around these facilities, build chargers that are not only for EV car sharing but also there for residents to use. And um, uh, one of the things I just kind of talk, briefly about this project is that, as it relates to installing EV chargers at those locations, that we found that there are challenges in learnings, mostly to deal with host sites, who would like these, who thinks it would be good for their clients, concerns by the owners of those facilities. Most of these are retrofits. So getting those host agreements and talking about risk and liability and other issues with the property manager in developing those charging stations at those locations. But then there's questions on ownership and management of those charging stations and vandalism and who maintains them. So there's a lot of kind of interest, but also being hesitant about installing these or providing these to clients. So we're halfway through this project. Hopefully more on this soon. And then the other one I just wanted to bring up, because this is just launching here in Portland, another Department of Energy funded project through PBOD partners. Two utilities here. There's more information on the project page, but the city of Portland is installing 50 utility pole mounted EV chargers. So really, this is kind of exploring where to put these, how do these support multifamily housing and people that don't have access to chargers at their home. And then we're also looking at, that's the residential side, but we're also looking at how TNC or ride-hail drivers would possibly use these. And obviously, we're going to be doing a whole policy and analysis on the permitting and infrastructure, including the planning and installation of these chargers. So that's it.
All right. Thank you, John, and thank you all speakers. And so I would like to invite all of the speakers to join us back on stage by turning on your webcams. And all right, so to attendees, we'll be taking some audience questions at the end. So feel free to drop some of your questions in the chat. So thank you for your brief presentation. Sorry, you didn't have a lot of time, but I have some. We have some prepared questions to go over some of those big issues. So I have this. I know, Theresa, you went over some of the challenges for multifamily housings. I don't know if anyone else want to add anything else to her list there. And if there's any in a big, owner and operator developer standpoint, are there any things that stands out to you in multifamily housing property industry right now?
I think the biggest challenge really is, you've got to have people who understand EV charging, understand the fundamentals, that can collaborate and work with the utility companies, but also the permitting departments. I mean, going into it with some knowledge, the right questions to ask, and being able to start well in advance early. I think that's critical. I think you can probably, you certainly have to understand the zoning, the codes, and the safety regulations. If you don't know that, you also have to know, you have to go into it, asking the utility providers for some, a site assessment, partner with them, get a site assessment, and see what see if they can advise you as the developer and your team on, optimal charger placement. Obviously you're going to want to have them as close to uh, the uh, the power location as possible, but that's going to help minimize your construction disruptions and delays. It's also going to allow them to offer upfront information on technical requirements that are specific to that site, especially when you're talking about buildings that are maybe older buildings, very dense buildings where there's retail, multifamily, there's some sharing components with parking. It gets a lot more complex when you're looking at those retrofit type scenarios on older buildings. So really, before you start doing anything, you have to kind of have your roadmap. You have to have your strategy down, and you have to understand, all the different components of EV charging. And really, more importantly, you got to understand who your renter's going to be, a feasibility study, like what's the demand for EV charging in that building. We manage a lot of A-class buildings, and if you've got rents to $350, $4, I mean, you're going to have a lot of EV charging. You're going to have a lot of EV vehicles in your building. We have some of those buildings, and so you have to understand what your population and what your demographic is going to be living in your building, so that you can future-proof the situation. Because the EV car sales and the demand for EV is growing exponentially, and so we need to prepare for that. Even though there's been a bit of a stall on development, moving forward, we need to plan for it.
Thanks, Theresa. Very good point. I'd like to invite any of the panelists. So we talked. Theresa talked a little bit about codes and maybe regulatory environment, right? Like, how are the codes changing the landscape? In the regulatory environment, what would be the best solutions for the government or the codes that the developer wants to implement EV charging for multifamily?
Those are some big questions. Pretty sure somebody could make a thesis out of that. But again, there's not really a simple answer, and because the U.S. is so, one, spread out, but two, it has such differing areas of EV adoption. Some areas that are just seeing some of their first EVs, and others are well into the 20, 30, 40, 50% even. I've heard stories of condos, especially condos in the Bay Area, being already past 50% EVs. Really, looking at some of these properties needing to not just future-proof, but foolproof. And that's a term I really haven't ever really used, but full build-out is sort of the term that I think of. At some point, it becomes a part of the business model. You look at it and you say the NOI is here, and we can afford the capex because we know we're going to get it back in 2 to 3 years from the owner manager standpoint. That is really hard when you're at those lower percentages. You're looking at it and you're saying, well, if I only have 3 or 4 cars, it's tough to justify what likely will be a sizable panel, potentially service upgrade, but that would be more for future proofing. Having codes that ensure EV capability in the future, I think, is the most important. We've seen a lot of pretty strong codes, and I like seeing those. But I also know that developers are having a really hard time, putting these deals together. And definitely want to invite Theresa to come back on, maybe in a couple speakers to talk more about that, because I think it's a bigger factor than people think it is. And it's probably not the straw that breaks the camel's back, but it's part of the list of codes that is making these deals harder. So I guess I'll open it up either to Randy or Arthur or John to answer more, but I want to pass it back over to Theresa eventually.
Randy, you're on mute.
Probably help. Sorry about that. A quick build on Whit's point. I think the real critical piece of the code, a lot of times you hear about the percentage of parking, and particularly in the transportation profession, people are saying, oh, percent of stalls have to be chargeable. What's the more important, particularly for new construction right now, is making sure EV compatible and EV ready equipment is put in place. Because whether it's the San Francisco example that Whit had or the 2 cars, you have flexibility. Once you don't have that flexibility, it becomes an enormous undertaking, and that's why the retrofits are struggling, and that's where the public space and public provision becomes a key role. And so simply just turning it over to code, it's probably got to be real careful. I know the NEC, they went through a lot of work in their codes in providing guidance. And this whole issue of percentage of stalls was a really contentious issue. But the EV readiness and the EV compatible, I think everybody's bought in that, you got to have that flexibility, because there's a lot of uses for that in the future. Even if you were wrong, let's just presume we were wrong on the EV side. There's uses for that electrical capacity in other ways in facilities going forward. So that makes no sense not to do that. So I think the key part of the code is to make sure that you have the things in place that make it easy to take the next step forward.
Thanks, Randy. Anyone else? John, want to add anything?
No, not really. I just kind of mentioned the challenges at the affordable housing locations, in that most of these are retrofits. Certainly, I think if you have the opportunity to put in code for future building, and I know the whole country is looking at trying to build more, particularly affordable housing or low income housing, that you at least are putting it ready. And the from what I've seen is the cost of that additional readiness is not going to really disrupt the cost of build there. But the retrofits has really been kind of problematic for on the affordable multifamily housing side to even put in some of these EV car sharing opportunities, because it's just so costly to add that in. So that's all I'll say.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, John. And Theresa?
Christy, I can jump in on. I think that was a great point. I think going back to what I said about planning and awareness and knowledge. Knowledge is power, really, when it comes to this space. And it's very true. Like I go to the NMHC, annual meetings. There's 2 meetings, and there's such a need for more affordable housing. But I will say there's a lot of vendors, a lot of new vendors in the market. I've met with a handful of them, and these models for installing EV charging they're getting very creative, okay, and where they can go in and they can deploy the capital. Now they do have to go in on that site. They have to do a feasibility study. They have to look into that market and see what is the potential for what is the demand there in that market for EV charging, and who lives in that building and what have you. They do a study, but these companies, like Revs is one of them down out of Houston. They'll do a model where they deploy the capital and work it out to where it's like a management deal. You know what I mean? They essentially own the EV chargers. They'll deploy the capital, and then for a period of time, 5 to 10 years, whatever the term is, the building owner can get a cut of the revenue off of the EV charging. Those are some creative ways for owners to, offer a solution to residents and to advance EV charging in their spaces. But you got to be knowledgeable about it, and it takes time and a lot of effort to understand what those programs are and what the nuances of them are, and what the legal requirements are. I will say owners are always also concerned about not only the front end of developing a building, but selling a building on the back end. And oftentimes they don't want a lot of, long-term contracts and strings that are going to constrain the sale. But as this continues to advance and EV charging, there's such a high demand for it. It's kind of like cable contracts back in the old days. You know what I mean? You got to have internet. You got to have service. People demand the service, and it has to be good service. It can't be marginal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're on point about the cable service of old days. So I think I just want to build on to that and codes and regulations. But how are EVs challenging our cities, state agencies and counties? I think it's regulation is one thing, but are there anything else that we see in the trends, like Randy, John, or anyone else?
Well, I'll raise one issue right out of the gate is particularly on publicly provided is the durability of the equipment that goes in the field. I've had a EV charger in my garage bought off of Amazon for over 10 years. The thing is take it to the bank, it works. But it's sitting in a pristine environment in a garage, and I'm not beating it up or doing any nasty stuff to it. And it's only one user. When you put that out in a parking lot or in a park or in a open space, so far the durability issue has been a big question. I think that's where you get a lot of multifamily housing folks going, gosh, and I'll just use an example in the transportation world. This is going to turn into the call box of the future, where we have a bunch of call boxes and another technology comes, cell phones, and all of a sudden all that investment and all that equipment is now not useful. And so the agencies are, having to figure out and chart their future as to what their role basically, looks like. And being the provider is probably not one of them. Possibly, providing funds and subsidizing and helping advance, piloting, demonstrating, providing pathways. But the simple provision, definitely, I think people are, particularly on the agency side, or that's just one more thing they can't keep up with.
Yeah, very important durability. Anyone else?
I'll just jump in real quick. And, I think, obviously the current political environment is testing a lot of cities and where they're on their track to meet climate goals or other type of adoption, goals in this kind of energy transportation transition. And a lot of that is, as you can see, two of the projects that, I'm working on are DOE funded projects, but, state incentives are kind of going away. And I think a lot of that is the struggle in understanding, this kind of like how much infrastructure do we need versus the demand, and how much, infrastructure do we need to kind of push the demand. And I think just to point to the City of Portland pole mounting project, which is also, I think, a sister solution to some of these multifamily housing ideas is, obviously having some available in the street. But I think that really is what the city's trying to learn out of this project are some of these what are the permitting and demand issues, but also and I see some of these questions about the long-term viability of the business model of, who maintains, how long do these kind of chargers last, who maintains the chargers, and what are we needing to help promote this kind of right-of-way charging. And I think we all have some great questions in the chat about these things, and we're all kind of struggling to understand the amount of effort by each of the partners that needs to take place to help kind of create this network of infrastructure to support people's transition to electrification.
I might add just a little bit is that, trying to figure out where the right monetization of the EV charging model fits is going to be key. Because if it's the public agency providing it, I think we're already learning that model's probably not going to work. But in a luxury apartment and in an own parking environment, that model works. So we got two poles, one that really works and one that really doesn't work. And so trying to figure out where can you make money, and particularly when you have multifamily housing and people are clamoring, the people that have the EVs are clamoring for direct to rate pricing. They don't want to be third partied into double, triple, quadruple the rate and not have control over that. And so trying to navigate that proper path where the market delivers, and we got 50, 100% of people that are EV charged or cars and need charging and are willing to pay either premium, and it seems like the model might be they're paying a premium for their housing or for their parking, and they're paying for the parking that comes with electrical. Might be the model where the finances work, where if it's just simply paying through a third party vendor, the user is feeling like that's not good for them. So it's really super complex, and I don't know that we've really landed on the right solution quite yet, because there's multiple parties that want the best solution.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Randy. Yeah, we have some great questions coming in from attendees. Maybe some of the questions we can answer is that one question for the panel is, I noticed a slide about third party versus direct to consumer charges, and I'd like to dive into this a little bit more. Do apartment complexes want to be the one to charge for electricity and run the EVSE systems, or do they prefer a third party for that manages all that?
I'll take that one. We've done it both ways. It really, as a third party manager, it all goes back to the owner's wishes and expectations, because they own the property. And so the model could be, ABC for this property and XYZ for this property. So, I mean, I've had my hand in a handful of these transactions, trying to assist a client just basically with information, general information. And it's really going to be their choice based on whether they want to deploy the capital up front or not, or whether they can put trust into a vendor. And I think, the top 5 EV charging providers, offer various models. Okay. And you've got Blink, you've got ChargePoint. I mean, there's a variety of different ones. And really just understanding those models and understanding the hold period for the client. If they're a developer, typically that hold period is much shorter. You know what I mean? It's like, well, let's build it, let's lease it up, and let's sell that building. That's a whole different model than if you have, we have a fund and it's a 20-year, those are long-term holds. You know what I mean? We're not going anywhere for a while. So in those scenarios, it might be treated totally different. And so, and you can do the cash runs, the financial runs on it, and see what works better for you. But it's a variety of flavors, honestly, as a third party manager.
Can I add to that one? That's a point that I feel a lot of the EV charging realm doesn't grapple with enough. I've met a lot of the EV charging companies that have been hiring from the multifamily sphere for a while now, and those groups understand this, and that they understand that when you're selling to a developer that is just going to build and sell, that is a different business model. And if you're trying to do a business model off of that, you need to tailor your business model to that. That is something that I have not seen incentive providers really understanding and creating incentives that are geared towards that specific build construction setup. Whereas they have they have their incentive for a different situation. And really, I want to see more incentive providers looking at these different build scenarios and retrofit situations based on different market segments, based on the age of the building. And frankly, some of these buildings, they're not going to be around in 30 years. They're not going to be around in maybe even 20 years. So putting a lot of money into them right now probably doesn't make sense. And that's a hard truth that I think a lot of the EV charging world, some people understand it and other people are like, oh, that's actually a good point. I didn't think about it like that. But it depends. It depends so much on the financials of the property, the regulatory environment, and much more. So thank you, Theresa. I think that point, if I'm going to recommend anybody go back and watch a section of this, it's probably going to be that. People need to know that.
I'm going to try to say one more thing. In property management, in multifamily property management, there's a couple of aspects that, if you don't place enough focus on it, it's parking management, understanding your parking management and your demand for parking, and trash management. If you don't understand that, that's off subject here, but I mean, if you don't have those things dialed in, and then I'm going to throw a third one in, is access. Access to the building and elevators. If you do not fundamentally understand those things going into a building, you have a problem. You know what I mean? So more people need to spend more time understanding their market, their demographic, and those three aspects of what's happening in their building, because it can be a nightmare if you don't have it planned correctly. And really, then it creates challenges in the relationship between you managing the building and your owner and the residents and everything. So it's critical.
Theresa, you bring an excellent point up about access, and it may seem nuanced. It's like, here's this charging system, isn't it great? But if you haven't thought through all of the steps of the users along the way, it's almost like you're wasting. Again, it doesn't take that much to do it right, but you have to think it through. You have to plan it through and really understand who's going to be using these chargers. And if you don't, you can quickly take a really expensive investment and pretty much waste it in short order.
I've seen it happen with a lot of things, honestly. I've seen it happen with package lockers too.
I bet you've seen it with garbage too.
I mean, if I could write a book on what not to do, I would. You know what I mean? If I had the time. But anyway, no, just having the planning and thinking it through is really critical, and the management and the support of it. We talked about the service model. I mean, you can't just put chargers in and just have them there. Like, you have to have a systematic approach to managing and monitoring the performance of the chargers and the maintenance of the chargers, and preventing trip hazards, and there's just lots of things, making sure there's adequate lighting around the chargers. So there's a lot more to it than just sticking some chargers in the garage and trying to satisfy a requirement or a what you believe is a need for the residents, but fully understanding the current resident base, the demand, but then also the potential future view of what could happen on that building.
One minor addition to that too is we talk about electric vehicle, but scooters and electric bikes and their charging needs are a little bit different. Don't require all the heavy end on the electrical side, but they do. I mean, just even having 120 access and a secure place to park, just thinking through what that would look like and how you would accommodate that makes it much more accessible to many, many more people, particularly when you talk about lower income housing. E-bike is a lot more in an urban area, a lot more affordable than a $50,000 average new vehicle. So.
Yeah, and I'll just add on, Randy, not only, if you look at size of e-bikes, cargo bikes, they're not traditional, like, you can just put them up on a rack very easily. But, Theresa mentioned understanding your parking, particularly for new builds in some cities that are getting rid of parking requirements. This can also push ownership outside onto the street, so right-of-way charging or whatever that may be, whatever it looks like, but also maybe the need to offer bike parking and other things that would offset some of that what your new clients are coming in, that how they're using modal options, so having bike rooms and the like. So it's a tricky world that we're kind of managing. What will the future look like for parking, and how do we charge that parking that is there?
Thank you all panelists. I think we'll have just one last question before we close the webinar. Do you guys do you feel like we will eventually reach a point where public fast charging at a gas station and other public sites may be the way to go, or we only have so much space and the multifamilies? Okay, this is a light in my room. To go. We only have so much space at the multifamily sites, and I'm worried that the demand will start outpacing the 2 to 4 ports that are usually placed in multifamily sites. Anyone?
Okay, let's start, and if y'all all right with that. I definitely think that's already the backup. And I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but I live in an apartment complex. I do not have home charging. I do drive an EV. So all of the things that I, profess to talk about, the solutions that I recommend have to work for me too. So this is the backup. This is plan B for if you do not have home charging. You're already going to a public space. I think society doesn't recognize how much power is going to be needed. And at some of these places, you don't need the ultra fast. You need something, maybe between 50 kilowatts and 150 kilowatts, because if it's actually 300 kilowatts, your charging is going to be done in about 20 to 30 minutes, except for some of the larger vehicles. And, then you got to rush back out of the grocery store and unplug your car too. So this is already the backup, but there's a lot of nuance. I think there's a lot of planning that multifamily providers need to do, so that they're not stuck in that situation where they've got 2 to 4 communal chargers and they don't know what to do because their panel is maxed out.
Thank you.
The idea that we're going to drive up to gas stations and do quick charging, maybe that technology, maybe that's where we end up, but today it doesn't look that way. And on the residential side, the DC fast charge on site doesn't appear to be the solution given the power load issues and needs. And so, whether we get there, to the point that we're able, technology, solid state batteries, longer ranges, 400, 600 mile range, 200 mile or 100 on a hybrid vehicle, and charging capabilities that don't break the battery down, because the battery is a pretty expensive piece of equipment. And so that fast charge, whether that's going to be able to be monetized, is the big question. And today, the idea of going home and using your own electricity seems to be where people's comfort is. To pay for that, that's the absolute opposite model of the gas station, because the gas station was affordable. It was 10 cents a gallon of gas when it first came out. It was the way to go get the gas. You couldn't get the gas any other way, but you can get the power different ways. And so the marketplace and the consumers are going to look at it a whole lot differently. And so, if that's the model we're waiting for, we're probably going to have to wait too long for where the demand is right now.
Thank you. Sorry, I think for the time we have to probably close the webinar, but I'd like to thank all the panelists for your great discussion and sharing your perspectives, and thank you for attendees to sharing your questions as well. So thank you again for your time and attendees, and back to you, Cynthia.
Thank you so much, Christy. John, let's quickly hear what you have to say before we wrap up.
All I was going to say is, I think for city planners and utilities, I would check out that NREL site that I mentioned. Really, what Randy was saying is, if we think 95% of the people are going to charge at home, that's not what cars. You can't fill up your gas car at home, right? So we're really looking at, how do we get that 5% coverage outside of the home? And it's tricky, but it's solvable between DC, public, private, partnerships, but that's where we're looking at. And so I think it's doable, but that's the fun that we get to contemplate and work on as a group to solve this issue.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone. And maybe in 2 years, we are having a webinar on the best-selling book on what not to do. And we're having the same group of panelists discussing. And hopefully in 2 years, we're not still talking about what not to do and we're moving a path forward. But I really wanted to take the opportunity to thank you all, Theresa, Whit, John, Randy, and Christy. Thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you so much, ITE, for partnering with us, Randy, for giving us this topic to discuss. And I forgot to say happy World EV Day to everybody as well. I wanted to open up with that, but thank you all so much for joining us. And I hope we're taking a break on the webinar until December, but I hope to see all of you in person at Roadmap coming up in October. More conversations to be discussed, and we hope to see you then. Have a great day, everyone, and I hope you all are doing something fun, EV related, today. Have a great day, everybody. Bye, all.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.